This podcast was sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be tuned in today. We welcome you to another edition of the Vickers Crossing podcast. The Vickers Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we're glad you're back with us today. As always, we want to say hello to our great sponsor, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. They've been such a great support to us in helping to keep our podcast both on the air and now on the internet. So this is kind of our COVID-19 take 4 or 5 now. Are we 4? How many have we done since?
It's like Tales from the Zoom Room.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. I like that. So we're doing it this way now, and things have been going really good, and we're glad that people could tune in and be part of it. My name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the priest and rector at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Memorial Anglican Church here in London.
My name is Kevin George. I'm the priest and rector at St. Aidan's Church in northwest London and the other vicar of the Vickers Crossing.
I'm Ian, and I'm always trying to figure out a new way to introduce myself, and I run this, I guess.
From the sanctum of his room.
Yes.
So for so long, Ian, people have been, we were just recording this. They always wanted to know, you get to know you in a more intimate setting. So this is worked out well now that we're on Zoom and we can get into your bedroom.
Of course, definitely.
Of course. And today, with special guests, we're so thrilled that we could get in touch today with Archbishop Anne Germond, who is joining us today from Algoma, I'm assuming.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with you, everybody. I'm up in Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario. The weather it's sunny, but it's absolutely bitterly cold. So I think, like most of us, I'm looking forward to spring arriving any day now. But it's great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. When I saw the season 2, I felt a bit like a Netflix star, just for a moment.
Don't get too excited.
If you've got a lot of time, you can binge listen to the first year.
That's right. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Archbishop, we're so thankful that we could have this format to chat with you today, and we're going to be doing that in just a minute. And I know Kevin has an introduction more formally for you here coming up, but one of the first things we want to do is just quickly check in with each other. It's been a few days since we've chatted. Anything new in Kevin's world in 3 or 4 days?
Geez, I don't know. It seems like every day is an eternity nowadays. We've been pretty active over here with this Zoom stuff, which is starting to drive me right around the friggin' bend. Everybody is pretty flat. And I'm just extroverted enough that I'd like to actually interact with a real human being besides my wife, Catherine Ann. I'm enjoying that interaction, but I'd like to interact with some others. And but we've done a lot of it. We've got a book group happening, actually. We sort of did it in memory of Rachel Held Evans. We did her book, Inspired. So we have 55 registrants. So we've got 2 groups, one in the morning and one in the evening. And they meet on Wednesdays after a morning prayer in the morning and then Vespers at night. So that's been keeping us pretty active. And in fact, I've found it all just a tad bit exhausting. I love every bit of it, every minute of it. But I am finding that this whole sort of reality, emotionally or whatever, does have me worn down a bit. And so in the interest of trying to model to people in my church and in my parish and to other colleagues and friends, I'm going to take 3 days off and do nothing. I'm going to just get off of the social media and get off of the train and try and take 3 days to rest well. So that's what's going on with me. What about you, buddy?
It's funny you said, connecting with people, it's been very difficult to be isolated like this. And for those of us that live and work and breathe in community all the time, to be separated from that is so hard. Today I was over at the church because we got all excited because we just bought a new video camera. And usually I get all excited because like a new vestment or a book shows up in the mail. Today I rushed over because there was a new video camera and we're using it to do some recordings and stream and stuff in these new days. But I walked out the back when I was done, and we have a veterans memorial garden in the back of our parish. And one of my parishioners was there doing some spring cleaning. And just for that brief moment to be able to say, Norma, how are you? And distance, but stand outside and have a chat with someone like that was wonderful. I mean, you miss that, right? You miss seeing your people like that. And we've been seeing each other on this format, obviously, but to be able to have that conversation, that connection like that was.
And I'd like to be able for you and I to go to one of our locals and get one of those frosty beverages that's in our logo.
That's right.
And we could do it with Ian now because he turned 19 since we went Zoom.
Oh, happy birthday!
And, Thank you.
He's within a month, but we could take him to the pub now too, Rob.
We can.
What has he been doing? What have you been doing? Is that all that's going on in your world, Ian?
That's how I feel.
It's crazy. I know, so complicated. Really nothing, and that's okay, I guess. I'm kind of waiting with bated breath. I think I know what the outcome is going to be, but my summer job, I usually work at a camp. I don't think that's going to happen because of our COVID friend here, but who knows? Maybe like the last week of August. I don't know. But I haven't been doing much other than patiently waiting for our COVID intermission to be over.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, especially think about my one son worked at camps. Both my kids worked at camps for years, and one had a job out in Alberta for the summer, but that's not going to happen now. And it's just tough there where everything's stopped like that. And so. Yeah. Are you ready for your question, though, Ian?
Yeah, always.
Okay, so once again, we scan the globe through the internet to try to find the most interesting questions for Ian because everybody wants to know. So right now it's time for that special part of the Vickers Crossing that we like to call Ian. Eddie. Wow. There we go. Where's our question from today, Ian? Or from Kevin?
Johannesburg. Today's questions from Johannesburg is from a couple of friends named Hans and what was that? What's that? Hans and Franz are sending this question to Ian. And the question is, what is your go-to COVID snack?
I haven't really been snacking on anything, which is good. Probably cereal, because I wake up, eat cereal, and then like dinner time rolls around, and then I have dinner. So it's like I don't really snack, which is good. I woke up at 8:30 today, so I had lunch today, which was insane.
8:30.
I don't normally have lunch.
8:30 a.m. Ian, you were up
Correct.
at 8:30 a.m. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I was.
What is the Archbishop's go-to COVID snack?
Oh, I have become quite the baker.
Ooh.
I haven't had a lot of time to bake with all the traveling, and so I've hauled out all these old recipe books from when I first got interested in baking, and so whatever cake is downstairs is my go-to snack. In fact, I just before I got on this call had a piece of my lemon cake.
Oh,
wow.
My own heart.
From the Archbishop. Oh. How about you, Robbie? What are you snacking on over there?
Anything with sugar on it, I'll pretty much eat. Yeah, me too, Archbishop. I love any cakes or pies or those types of things are my go-to. And I like to bake too a little bit. So I'm a big fan of peanut butter cookies, and I made a loaf about 3 weeks ago for the first time, which lasted about 35 minutes.
A loaf of what?
Just like a loaf, like a vanilla loaf.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we have one of the servers at the cathedral, and I have this little thing going. On Easter Sunday, he dropped off some cookies, iced cookies, and he wrote, "These are bunny butts." So the next week,
speaking of loaves,
the next week I made some chocolate chip brownies, and I took them to him, and I called them squirrel butts. He and I have now started a new baking company called Butting in Baking.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Every week we're going over to each other's houses and dropping some good bit of tasty treat off at each other.
Well,
that's great.
I gotta say, I haven't been eating much baking, but and I'm not doing any baking. I think if I had to pick, mine seems to be what's it called? London Ice Cream Factory's maple walnut with no sugar added for the diabetic.
Okay.
And then
Sounds delicious.
And then Catherine Ann put some strawberries and stuff on top there for me. Yeah.
Very nice.
I was thinking, Archbishop, if that person that helps you bake, if his first name was If, you could start a company called Ifs, Ands, or Buts.
Well done, sir. A big hand for Rob.
We can market that. Yeah.
I will be seeing him tomorrow afternoon. I will tell him that.
You're in.
For butts. I do like that.
Wow.
Not copyrighted, so have at it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, Kevin, would you please introduce our guest today? We know a lot about baking now, but I'm sure there's some more things our listeners want to hear about.
Right. Well, besides being an incredible baker, Archbishop Anne has done a whole lot in her life, and she is a gift to the church. We've come to know her in the last couple of years because of her role as Metropolitan, and because our diocese went through a whole transition, we got to see her come here and be a part of things here with the consecration of our Bishop Todd Townsend. And you will hear from her delightful accent. Grew up in South Africa, where she taught religious instruction and English methodology. And in 1986, her and her husband Colin left their homeland for Canada. And while Colin trained to be an oncologist in Ottawa, she completed her honors degree, majoring in religious studies through the University of South Africa. In 1989, Anne and Colin moved to Sudbury, and she earned a Bachelor of Theology from Thornloe University. She was appointed lay incumbent to the Church of the Ascension in 2000, where in short order, she was ordained to the diaconate in 2001 and to the priesthood in 2002. And then she was made Bishop of Algoma in 2017 and Metropolitan of the Ecclesiastical Province of Ontario in 2018. One might say a meteoric rise. And incredible work. And there's a whole lot more in this 2-page biography I got here. But the one thing that comes shining through is just what an incredibly faithful and loving human being our Metropolitan is, and how she has been dedicated to a life of serving others before she was ever ordained. And that has continued since she's taken on 3 orders in the church now. And so we're grateful to you, not just for being here today, but for the work that you're doing for us in the House of Bishops. So thank you. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Good. Now let's get right down to business. What are we going to do next? You just got off at a call with the House of Bishops. Tell us what's going on. No, let's be kinder than that. Let's go with this. I have no doubt in my mind that you have thoughts about the role of church as it relates to the public square, which is what we talk about here on the Vicar's Crossing. And as we've just heard in your biography, you grew up in South Africa during apartheid. In Canada, we're certainly familiar with people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the incredible work that he did because he's so iconic. But, you know, one of the things that we see, and I'm sure you see this as well in your work now as a archbishop in the church, but sometimes the acts of faithfulness that we see that are most profound around, not to diminish those big things that we learn about the Archbishop Tutus and so on, but we get to see sometimes in the very kind, simple, and humble acts of those who are walking their baptismal faith very well. We get to see what living a faith in the public domain looks like. And I can only imagine that must take on an incredible significance and weight if you're living the gospel of Jesus under an apartheid regime. So I wonder if you might be able to share a story or two about what it was like living in those times and how you saw the gospel reflected in the midst of that public square.
Absolutely, I'd be glad to. I think, first of all, I just want to say that just what you said, Kevin, about We often see the big and the grandiose, but it is in the very small and sometimes insignificant ways that change comes about. I grew up, as you've just said, in South Africa, and I attended a convent school. I was Roman Catholic in my childhood until, in fact, I was in my early 20s. And so as a child growing up in apartheid South Africa, I never sat on a bus with a person of color. I never went to a movie house and sat next to a black person in a movie. I never sat in a restaurant. In the parks, the benches had written on them for whites only, and then special benches for blacks. And so it was this world where we just never intersected in a normal social way with people of color. And so the school that I attended was only for white children. And all of that changed. This was a convent school, and it was run by an order of nuns called the Sisters of Mercy. There were schools, 2 schools in Johannesburg, and then they also had a school in Soweto, which was the township just outside Johannesburg, where black children could attend that school because it was in a township. But everything kind of came to a head on June the 16th, 1976, when black children in Soweto held a protest march. And so when you think about the role, Ian, of young people in the public square, they went on a peaceful march through the streets of Soweto, protesting the fact that they were required to learn in Afrikaans, which for many of them was their third language. So their native tongue, whether that was Zulu or Sotho or Xhosa, would have been their first language. Probably English would have been a second language. And so Afrikaans was the third language for them. And this was the language they were required to take their schooling in. And so the youth started with a peaceful protest through the streets of Soweto. And it immediately turned into something of a bloodbath as police arrived, and there were altercations, and many lives were lost on that day. But that became the turning point that I remember in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, because suddenly young people were saying, we're done. There will be no more of this. And it just escalated and escalated and escalated. And I clearly remember the day, the next year, so at the beginning of 1977, when I was in my final year of high school, the Sisters of Mercy said, we believe that every child deserves the right to go to any school. And so we just want you to know that we are opening the doors of our school to children of all races. And in South Africa, that was punishable because that was against the law. And the nuns just stood by their conviction that, the dignity of every single human being. And for them, that meant allowing every child to go to the school that they wanted to go to. And it was really revolutionary. And what was amazing and so wonderful was that I was part of that school that opened its doors to children in Johannesburg. And gradually it started to happen more and more that other private schools opened up their doors. That's the one little story I wanted to share with you. And the other is about my sister-in-law, Susan Germond, who, like myself, was a primary school teacher in South Africa. And her husband was the rector of a parish in Johannesburg. And like so many of our churches, they had numbers of Sunday school rooms which were only being used on a Sunday. Mm. And so my sister-in-law came up with this idea of having a school in these Sunday school rooms. And so the intention is that it would be a bridge school for the education that black children were receiving in South Africa at that time was inferior. And really they were not, it was not up to the normal government standards. And so her idea was to have this school that would be a bridge school, so that when apartheid ended and children were able to go to any government school, they would be able to go to any government school. And so she started this little school in the church, in Sunday school rooms, named it Vuleka. You can look it up. It's still in existence today. And in the end, every single church, just about in Johannesburg, opened up, Anglican church, opened up their Sunday school classrooms to hosting Vuleka bridging schools for black children. So, these small acts, which actually affected great change. In the church, we are very used to having a servant role. So we're used to caring for the poor. We're used to, feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, as Jesus teaches us. But the church is actually called to a more prophetic role. And, that one person's idea of having a bridging school, or the Sisters of Mercy saying we're going to open the doors to everybody, that becomes a prophetic act.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, it makes great change happen.
I mean, praise Jesus. I mean, I think the thing is, when I listen to you tell those two stories, is, you consider the stories that we in North America have heard, whether it was, the work of Mandela or Tutu and world leaders who supported them and came alongside and all that. What we don't hear are those grassroots stories and without those, the work of these giants, these spiritual giants, would perhaps never take. I mean, it takes the body faithful, the people of God, to actually have the courage and the will to risk. Because those Sisters of Mercy, they were taking quite a risk. Your sister-in-law taking a huge risk.
Mm-hmm. No question. And I don't know if you've heard the wonderful story about Desmond Tutu and why he decided to become an Anglican clergyman.
Share it, please.
When he was a little boy, he tells a story of how he was walking through the streets of Johannesburg. And those were the days that when you were walking along a sidewalk, if a white person was walking on the sidewalk, the black person had to step off the sidewalk onto the road. And he says he was walking along the sidewalk with his mother, and this priest, this man dressed in a clerical garb, came walking along. And instead of his mother stepping off the sidewalk, this man tipped his hat to his mother. And he said to his mother was so taken by that and discovered that he was an Anglican priest.
At mine now too.
Discovered that he was an Anglican priest. And Desmond Tutu said that moment of somebody seeing the divine dignity in my mother.
Yes.
I said to my mother, I'm going to be an Anglican priest one day. So never underestimate those small, moments.
Prophetic.
And it speaks to so much, our baptismal covenant that speaks of respecting the dignity of every human being, which can, shown in that story, that small act of offering dignity. It's this mustard seed kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely.
It blooms into something that you can't even imagine. And
Desmond Tutu. A tip of a hat to Desmond Tutu.
Yeah.
No. I know.
Incredible stories.
Yeah.
Archbishop, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing with the House of Bishops a little bit. You just mentioned that you were just finishing up a meeting today with many. I don't have to tell you, we're living in crazy times. We're living in strange times right now, and we've all had to adapt to the new way of being, and the church is all part of that as well over this past month. And, we're thankful to God and to you and the bishops for their leadership right now, which is supporting us. And I know the Ontario House of Bishops have been working in concert during this crisis together under your leadership. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what it's been like leading this group right now in these circumstances that we're in. And if you want to share or can share anything that's come out of today's meeting or anything past that really has struck you that you could share with the church?
Yeah, for sure.
Do that.
So again, a little bit of background on how the Provincial House of Bishops in Ontario usually meets. And then just to expand that, to talk about just how different it is now, but how good it is now. And not to say that what was in the past wasn't good, because it was good. And we crave and long for the day when we will be back together in a meeting room, where we can, not have these two-dimensional meetings, but we can actually connect with each other again on that other level. So usually the Ontario House of Bishops would meet twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And we would have 2 days of meetings. And then if there was any other business that we needed to deal with, we would do with it, we would do it over email. But the minute we decided, that the pandemic really was declared and we decided to suspend worship, we believed that the best way that we could lead would be to be together and to meet as regularly as we could. And so we named Tuesday afternoon at 2:00 our regular meeting time for the Ontario House of Bishops. And we've been doing that faithfully since March the 17th. The week leading up to the suspension of services of worship, so that was March the 15th, we were meeting, every day, in teleconferences, trying to decide whether we should suspend worship. We wanted everybody to be safe. And we just, in the end, as other churches and denominations did, decided that suspending worship was the best course of action. But what has happened as a result of having these regular meetings is that we've started this absolutely wonderful pattern of meeting where we open in prayer and then we just check in with one another. So how are you doing? What's going on? What's going on in Huron, and how are things in Niagara and Toronto? And it's actually forged deeper, closer relationships with one another in a strange sort of way, because it's just as if the conversation ends and then we pick it up the next week where we left off. I can tell you one of the things that we continue to have a conversation about and did again this afternoon is the role of Eucharist. That in Ontario we've asked for a voluntary fast on the celebration of Eucharist in online services, and we recognize just how difficult that has been for all of us, because we're Eucharistic communities, and so we're continuing to have those conversations, knowing that people. That people are really hungry to gather in community again and to receive Eucharist. But as we can't, what can we do? So today we had a long conversation about spiritual communion and how we can receive spiritually. But I think we've been caring for one another, listening to each other, really. Talk about their struggles, because it has been a time of great anxiety and stress for numbers of our clergy. And so as bishops and our laity, for all of our congregations who are struggling with isolation and depression and learning to work in new ways at home when you've got children at home with you, it's not easy, and it hasn't been a normal pattern of working. So I think that it's just been a way of meeting together for mutual support and encouragement, to hear one another's stories, their struggles, and also their joys. Because let me tell you, in the midst of this, the fact that on Pentecost Sunday, there's going to be an Ontario Pentecost service. Each diocese is going to put a little piece together of a great big Pentecost service and share in that magnificent feast. So, out of lemons, we're making lemonade. my symbol of the resurrection, and I should have brought it to show you. I might run downstairs and get it. Is the dung beetle. You know, the dung beetle lays its eggs in poop, and out of that new life comes. And so I think that in the midst of real challenges, and in some cases worrying about, you know, will there be parishes that will actually survive COVID-19? Yeah. We've actually come together in just incredibly wonderful ways. Today we prayed. We spent 15 minutes together in prayer, praying for Bishop-elect Shane Parker, who was consecrated on May the 31st in Ottawa Cathedral. And it was just such a beautiful time of just being able to hold Shane up to God in prayer. And so the ability to meet on Zoom has given us ways of doing things which, you know, we could have used Zoom last year. Why didn't we? Why weren't we meeting on Zoom last year?
We're getting revelations out of this.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, we had Bishop Todd on with the clerics this morning. We had a meeting, and he was talking about how this is a time, a revelatory time, that there are things coming out of this that are being revealed to us as a church and as individuals, and that if we are mindful of that, can be very formative.
Yeah.
So
I think we're working differently, and in some ways we're working smarter than we were before. But many people are finding Zoom exhausting. Yeah. Just the constant movement from one meeting to the next via Zoom can also be very exhausting. And I think we do, even though this will be a new way of being, you know, Zoom is not going away now. I think we have to balance it with face-to-face meetings when we can, and to use other ways as well.
Certainly, I know Rob's got another question for you, but before we get to that, it certainly raises for me too, just environmentally and so on, because we've often demanded travel, which has created a whole carbon footprint that, you know, so there are things coming out of this that will be effective. The other interesting thing that just popped out of what you just said, though, I wonder before Rob goes on to the next question, is you mentioned Shane Parker, Bishop-elect, his consecration is coming up. Mm-hmm. How will that happen?
Well, it will happen within the provincial guidelines of COVID-19. So in the very early days of Canadian bishop history, early Canadian bishops were consecrated with a consecrating bishop and 2 other bishops, and that was it. And so there will be, Shane and I are working on an order of service where there will be no more than 5 people in the cathedral. Wow. So, there will be me as the Archbishop, and you were just at Bishop Todd's consecration service, so you know how huge it was.
Powerful.
Yeah, there will be me and myself and 2 other consecrating bishops, and a reader will come in and read a lesson, but and it will be live streamed. So please do watch it on May the 31st at 7 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. And as we said on our meeting today, this is going to be a very unique consecration service. And just as every other bishop's consecration service has been memorable in every way, this will be too. But make no mistake about it, God will act.
That's right. It is historic, that's for sure.
It is historic, and the Spirit will be there nonetheless.
No question, no question.
Bigger bishop picture, if we could, because I think this is a really powerful thing that came out, I guess, a week and a half ago or so. And Bishop Todd was mentioning this to us, and was on the podcast here with us talking about the guaranteed basic income, and the letter that that 41 Canadian bishops in support of the guaranteed basic income sent to Prime Minister Trudeau. And I just wanted to take a couple of lines from that letter for our listeners so they know part of what it's about. And Archbishop, your name was on that letter as well. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of this. It says, although we represent great diversity, we write to you because we are united and morally bound in a singular message. Canada needs guaranteed basic income for all. We need it today. There is a way to that goal, an alternative, affordable, just, and evidence-based policy option called guaranteed basic income. As Pope Francis wrote last week, this may be the time to consider a universal basic wage. And we would extend and amplify the pontiff's remarks. This is the time. Could you share a little bit about some of the conversations you had leading up to that letter and your decision to put that forward?
For sure. And it really happened so quickly, which I think pointed to the fact that this is a moment in time to act on something. And I don't know if you must have heard of, I brought his book, but you must have heard of David Brimmer from your area, who speaks a lot about faith in the public. He calls it faith in the public commons, not the public sphere.
Okay.
But he, in this little book of his, Faith in the Public Commons, Pursuing the Common Good, he uses this term, a kairos moment, God's moment.
God's time.
I think that's where I want to lead off from on this, that this was really a God-given moment where one email was sent out from one of the bishops who said, I'm thinking of having a conversation with Hugh Siegel, who is a retired conservative senator, about guaranteed basic income for all Canadians. Let me know if you want to be on that call with Hugh Siegel. And many of us were on that call. And at the same time that we were preparing to go on that call, some of the bishops were beginning to draft this letter that was the result, pull that letter together. And the letter went out, and it was Jeff Woodcroft in Rupert's Land Diocese who said, if you would like to sign this letter, let me know. And we did not know until it was published how many bishops actually came, how many bishops signed that letter. It was just one of those God-given moments where bishops just said, this is the time to act on basic guaranteed income. And part of the conversation we had with Hugh Siegel was that, during this time of COVID-19, the government has actually instituted a basic guaranteed income through the SERB program and through the wage subsidy program. And some of the naysayers for it would say, it would take too long to put it to make it happen. But look how quickly the wage subsidy program came into being. So that was one of the things that Hugh Siegel said. But the one that really resonated with me and why I really support it is that, first of all, Canada is a country with a social conscience. And the way that Canadians are supported is really to be lifted up. Again, I come from a country, I grew up in a country where that was not the case. And so, kudos to Canada. We have a social conscience big time. But I'm not sure that the present system actually lifts people out of poverty. And there are all kinds of restrictions for people who are either living on welfare or, with other kind of government funding, that there are restrictions for them, so that if you take a part-time job, then other things get cut back. Whereas with the guaranteed basic income, some of what I've been reading, Lindsay, Ontario, tried it out for 3 years in 2014. I understand the city of Hamilton has tried it out, and also Manitoba has tried it out. And what people who have been on these trial runs of guaranteed basic income say is that it actually enables them to keep working and to keep improving themselves. So people can take courses while they're receiving the guaranteed basic income, and enabling them to advance themselves in the way that they want. And there's no restrictions on how they spend the money. They can choose how they spend the money. So we had that Zoom meeting with Hugh Siegel, which was just fabulous, because he's a man who absolutely has a passion for Canada and for the well-being of this country. And, he said that he believes that, as we bishops did, that this is the time to really lobby the government and to promote guaranteed basic income. I don't actually know what the result has been of our letter, to be honest. I was hoping to find out before this call, but I don't know.
Well, let me say this. Our previous guest last week was an MP from our area called Kate Young. And we had this conversation actually because the letter had not yet come out, but it came out later that day, actually, I think, after we actually recorded with Kate. But we put this question to her about, whether or not she has any sense of how her government, because she's a Liberal MP, she's a parliamentary secretary, whether or not there was an appetite for this. And her words at the time, which I was glad to see the letter come out that afternoon, was, well, we need to hear from Canadians. That certainly there's the sense I get from her is that there's not a resistance to this within the government necessarily, but a resistance to change when there's going to be a lot of opposition, a lot of people saying, well, it's going to be costly. So are we prepared to take on the cost? And we were talking about, well, it's costly not to do it. And Hugh Siegel is just an incredible Canadian and a great person for you to be talking to. So my sense is she said, then we need to hear from the churches, and so from the wheelhouse that we live in, where we talk about faith in the public commons or the public square, I almost did a little dance when I saw the letter from the bishops. It was brilliant. How many bishops do we have in Canada?
Well, that was pretty well. That was
everyone.
That was almost all of them. Yeah.
The whole country is represented, and so now, and what we've been doing here is our bishop, and I'm sure you've done the same. Todd has asked us now individually to get a hold of our members of parliament, let them know that as faithful, we see this as an act of justice for people who really need the dignity that they deserve to be able to get from poverty to flourishing.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, Ian has a question.
Yeah, let's change the subject entirely.
Okay, baby. Well, not entirely.
Okay. That's fair, I guess. So you had the opportunity to travel around this wonderful province in your role as Metropolitan, which I realize now is a lot more than just an ice cream.
None taken, Ian.
What are you hearing from young people, and what are those who are in the church under the age of 25 saying? Are there people in the church under the age of 25? I'm in the church under the age of 25. I film Kevin every Sunday. But what are young people saying in this sort of in this trying time?
Well, the young people that I'm speaking to are quite anxious at the moment. As university ended very abruptly in the middle of March, and there was that shift immediately to online learning, which didn't go all that well to start with, but I think they've kind of leveled things out. So what I was hearing was a huge amount of anxiety and stress about, is my going to finish? Am I going to graduate? But what I'm hearing even more now is summer jobs. And actually our young people do want to work. They don't want to sit around the house all day. They want to get a job. They actually want to work.
You mean they're not lazy?
They're not.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, they do grumble about getting up in the morning. And for the first few days, noon is good. But actually, our young people do want to work. They want to have jobs. And I know that there are government support programs in place for them, but Summer jobs are not happening. And then I know some young people who've just graduated, and they said if it was difficult for us to find jobs before COVID-19, what is going to happen after COVID-19? Is there any hope for me to get a job? So that's what I'm hearing a lot of from young people, is sort of that state of, things were bad before, are they going to get any worse now? And again, our clergy and our parishes are doing incredibly good jobs about reaching out to people in their parishes. But I'm also suggesting that they reach out to young people too. We know that our seniors are struggling with isolation, but our young people are struggling with a whole different set of things right now. So how our churches can reach out to young people, check in with them. Young people also have a high rate of anxiety and depression, just as adults do, and connecting with them is very important. I do think that youth are looking for meaningful ways to engage in the communities in which they're living. And so, for example, I had 2 young people come over to Bishophurst and rake about 20 bags of leaves last week, which was fantastic because, first of all, it meant I didn't have to do it. That's right. But I just, I think that young people are looking for meaningful ways to engage, and so how do we keep that conversation going with young people?
If I can just say, I mean, Ian, you probably relate because Ian is in post-secondary school as well. He's doing music and industry arts, and one of the things
is already a competitive program because, how am I going to get a job?
Right, and it's very hard to get into and all that stuff. But he's also been one of the things that impresses me about Ian, and I think it speaks to what you're saying, Archbishop, is that he has, Ian is not your Sunday morning guy normally, but for a couple of years he's been once a week with us, hasn't he, Rob?
Oh yeah.
Faithfully making sure we get the word out this way. And since this has started, he's in church every Sunday morning, getting the videos out to people. So. We have to find ways to engage our young people, however that looks. Right, Ian?
Yeah.
He even sang for me a couple of weeks ago. He sang Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, played and sang it. Did a good job.
I think that's sometimes the big mistake that the church makes of trying to get young people into the church.
Yeah, instead of getting out to where they are.
What are we doing to get out to young people and to meet them where they're at? And this brings me back to a ministry that I was engaged with in Sudbury at the Church of the Ascension. We wanted to look around our neighborhood and see where the places were that we could become involved with in our own neighborhood. And we discovered, running out of the community college, an alternative high school. So for young people who couldn't make it in the regular school system for whatever reason, any number of reasons. And so, again, I had a conversation with the principal, and we said, how can we connect with Barry Down College? And it ended up that she said, young people love food. And so we found ways to feed those students.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, it really was a relationship that needed building, as every relationship does, because we said, let's have a spaghetti lunch and invite all the students to come to the church. And you would be surprised about how hesitant they were to walk through the doors of that church.
Yeah.
It was much easier for us to go to the school and have lunch with them on their turf.
Yeah.
And it was in the beginning to invite them. And it was only when the entire, all the school teachers said, we'll come for lunch with the students. That was when there was a bit of a game changer. Yeah. But it's meeting students where they're at, young people where they're at, not demanding that young people come and meet us where we're at.
Right.
And I think that, Ian, that's what I would say to you, that thank you for doing what you're doing now, because it's just such an incredibly wonderful thing. And people are watching you. So keep doing it. People are watching you. But what I would like to ask, may I ask Ian, because I've been, as we've been living in this COVID-19 world, we're all praying more. Every single one of us are praying longer, harder, and more often. And what are some of the things that the province of Ontario, that the wider church could pray about for young people?
A lot of my friends are worried about September, figuring out what happens for school, like if it starts up again, or if we have to go online again, and like my younger brother, he's just finishing grade 12, and I don't want him starting school online. That would be the worst thing, because that's like, I loved going to Fanshawe for the first time and going to where I was going to be for the next couple of months, and for him to start university and then not like be there would be awful. And I know so many people are in the same sort of boat, and I know that there's a lot of people just worried about their next steps, people just getting out of college or university, or people just getting in, and just everyone who's struggling to learn and to do what they normally like to do, getting out of the house. And I love my room, but I know that being in my room for 4 months or 5 months more would be just like, I think my room would be upside down by the end of it. So there, like, if there's any way to ease some of that strain for my generation and around that age, it would be wonderful.
Well, know that we are good prayers, and we will commend young people to our prayers, because that's the other thing I've heard, is how worried young people are about September. Will we be able to physically go back? And of course, you know that students who are in residence or who are in apartments or house sharing are still responsible for paying rent over the summer months. So their financial worries as well, which kind of translates up to families. So I just think it's cumulative, right? The worries are cumulative.
Yeah. Well, that conversation you just had about what your parish, I assume the Ascension, was doing in school, segues well into our next question for you, which is really about your diocese is quite large geographically, Algoma, and you have responsibility for Moosonee. And I understand that our retired primate, Fred Hiltz, is up there with you. Please say hello to Fred for us, because I just think he's a prince of a guy. That's a man. I just love that man. But with that sort of responsibility in the north, and the public square, the public commons in mind, what are the issues most pressing? What is it the church needs to come to the occasion to, so to speak, in terms of those public issues, whatever they might be right now?
Well, in the Diocese of Moosonee, they're concerned a lot about, so Kashechewan is one of our parish, one of our communities on the west coast of James Bay. And so right now, again, they're dealing with flooding. And so, how do we talk about things like safety in our community, just in terms of something as simple as good water,
right.
good homes, good safe homes for people. This morning, I was on a Zoom call with Laura Tamlin Watts, who you might want to invite to the Vickers Crossing at some point.
Writing it down now.
Laura is very involved with elder care, and had a conversation with me about elder abuse. you know, and has said, how can we in our faith communities come together to talk about elder abuse and to name it and to find ways again to support it, you know, to be advocates against safety for elders. It was just an absolutely great conversation with her this morning, and she again said, with COVID-19 and the effects in our long-term care facilities and the number of deaths in our long-term care facilities, she said, this is a Kairos moment. She said, this is a moment where we in our faith communities can act. And so I said, well, we're in, you know, whatever we can do, we're in with you. And so that conversation only happened this morning. But again, you know, what are the opportunities that COVID-19 has given us to stand with you know, other organizations and to put our stamp on it. And you know yourselves just how much credibility faith communities have with seniors. You know, a lot of our population are frail elderly people. And there are wonderfully trusting relationships between, you know, a clergy and the frail elderly. And so the church is absolutely suited to having a big voice in elder care and, you know, speaking out against elder abuse. So that's today's new project is let's have a conversation about the stand that the church can take.
Yeah.
So I do urge you to invite her because she's very passionate. I mean,
I want to talk to her. I once got kicked out of a nursing home for advocating. I've also been kicked off a used car lot, a Tim Hortons, a Starbucks, and I don't know how many pubs. But
why have I not heard of this before? What the heck?
Kevin calls getting kicked off of stuff Tuesday.
Yeah. But that conversation about you know, like we're warehousing our seniors, right? We've outsourced the care of our seniors to private companies, publicly traded in some cases. And so, you know, when and joking aside, I sat in a meeting where I heard people talking about getting the cost of meals below $4, right? So you know, when you're and you're right about our purchase with those homes. I mean, there's not a long-term care facility in this city that isn't begging us to come and do church.
Yeah.
So we have an in, and there is a voice to be had there. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Archbishop, our time's coming to an end. We know your time is precious, and we really appreciate you giving us this hour. I know there's lots going on in your work and in your ministry, and I can't thank you enough for spending time with us and sharing all that you have. And I know it's going to be a great gift to our listeners, and know that we continue to pray for you. Our churches here in Huron pray for you every Sunday on our cycles of prayer in the House of Bishops, and we do wish you well as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll continue to hold each of you in my prayers individually, but also your diocese. I know that you're beginning a new journey with a bishop who has been a bishop in a season of pandemic, and I think is longing and looking forward to getting out into the parishes and meeting everybody. But God continues to do God's work through Bishop Todd, and I was so happy to come both to the election and to the consecration. So it's wonderful to be connected with the Diocese of Huron, and Zoom has made this afternoon possible. So thanks for the invitation.
Well, thank you. We always like to just one more final thing with our guests before we sign off. Are you open to a quick lightning round? 4 quick questions. First thing that comes to mind. Here we go. Question number 1, favorite place to relax in the summer?
Kruger National Park.
Never been there. Got to check that out. If you had a choice of going to a sporting event, cricket or rugby?
Rugby.
Rugby. Nice. If you had to sit down for a nice little snack, and I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation of this, but biltong or Burzwar?
Biltong any day.
Any day. And if you had to get out of the diocese for a little bit, just as a break, what's your second favorite diocese in Ontario?
Huron.
Really, correctly.
That's right. And for that, we will be sending you some Vickers Crossing swag in the mail.
Oh, wonderful.
When this all lifts and you do come down here again, we must be made aware of it, because we do have gifts for our guests, but we can't shove them through the screen. But we will make sure we have something for you. And if I can just say before you go to, we had as a parish, St. Aidan's, because we were Todd's parish, had quite a role in that consecration when you were here. And I just want to share with our listeners the kindness and the care that you showed to all who participated, and to offer thanksgiving for the way you honored them all, and that you sent a note to everybody and a thank you card to everybody, down to Kate, who played the violin, and right up to the preacher and everybody from our parish that participated. You sent them a personal note, and that you took the time to do that has meant an incredible amount to everybody who received them. So thank you for doing that.
It's a pleasure. It was such a beautiful day, and I think that moment when there's so many sacred moments, but when the children from the parish came and put that cope on him, it was just beautiful. So it was, when you speak of highlights of ministry, that's up there. And Rob, I just do want to say that we have a wonderful little cottage in Northern Ontario that is actually my favorite place to go. But as I can't go there or South Africa,
well, we got to take what we can get right now.
Dreaming.
Let the three of us know what week is free, and we'll leave it standing. I may get kicked out of there.
I'll bring the biltong. Perfect.
Yeah, bring the biltong. Oh.
Yeah, we're in. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks to our listeners for checking in too, and Archbishop, take care. Okay, all the best to you.
God bless everybody.
Bye bye. Vickers Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And again, we thank our sponsor, A. Miller George Funeral Home, and Dave and the gang there that's been helping us out with this over the last little while, and their support, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. So until we get together again next time, I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen.
Kevin George from St. Aidan's.
Ian.
And Anne.
Good. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend. We'll talk
You
soon.
didn't say the line.
Oh, yeah, Kevin. Remember to look both ways.
Before you cross the street.